So, have you ever really thought about what happens when we carve up nature? When a huge forest stops being a forest and becomes a bunch of little green islands floating in a sea of roads and farms? Well, it turns out there are these invisible rules that kick in, rules that decide what lives and what dies. Let's get into it and explore the science behind habitat fragmentation.
All right, so what are we even talking about here? Habitat fragmentation is, well, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's when we take a big, seamless ecosystem and just slice it into a bunch of smaller, lonely pieces. Imagine a giant painting that someone just cut into 1,000 puzzle pieces. That continuous home for countless species, it's suddenly a disconnected mess.
And let's be clear, the stakes here are incredibly high. This isn't just some minor issue. We're talking about one of the main reasons we are losing species all over the planet. Every time a habitat gets fragmented, the extinction risk for a whole bunch of species goes way, way up.
To really get why this is so devastating, we have to look at what happens right away, the immediate fallout from shattering an ecosystem. So let's explore this world in pieces.
The damage really comes in three main flavors. First, and most obvious, the pieces are smaller. That means they just can't support as many animals or plants, and smaller populations are super vulnerable. Second, those pieces are now isolated. Animals can't move between them, so gene flow just stops. And third, you get this thing called the edge effect. Suddenly, the dark, damp forest interior is exposed to bright sun and wind, creating a totally different, often hostile environment for the species that evolved to live deep inside. Now, to really wrap our heads around the rules of this broken world, scientists came up with a fantastic metaphor. They said, hey, what if every one of these forest patches is actually an island? And that simple question leads us straight to a huge idea, the theory of island biogeography. Back in the 60s, these two guys figured out that the number of species on an island is basically a constant tug-of-war between new species arriving and old species dying out. And here's the genius part. This doesn't just work for islands in the ocean. It's a perfect model for these islands of habitat we're creating everywhere. So what decides who wins that tug-of-war? It boils down to two incredibly simple but powerful factors. First up, size. A bigger island can support more species. Makes sense, right? And second, distance. How far is it from the mainland or another big habitat patch? The farther away it is, the harder it is for new colonists to make the journey.
So you can see where this is going. When you've got a habitat fragment that's tiny and way out on its own, the math is just brutal. The extinction rate skyrockets while the immigration rate plummets. And the result? You lose species. The island becomes a lonely outpost, slowly bleeding life. But look, this isn't just some dusty old theory. Nope. We see this playing out in the real world all the time. For a perfect example, let's head over to the Cantabrian Mountains in Spain. So researchers there were looking at this one specific plant, Primula vulgaris, living in these little forest islands. And what they found was like a textbook case study. The plant had a super hard time spreading between patches that were far apart. The plants in the smallest patches had way less genetic diversity. And yep, you guessed it, the most isolated patches had the highest risk of the plant just disappearing completely. But hold on. Is that the whole story? Is every little patch of nature just doomed to slowly fade away? Well, maybe not. A newer idea came along that completely flips the script. It's not about isolation, it's about connection. It's about the survival network. This brings us to metapopulation theory. Instead of seeing each patch as a lonely island, this theory says, hey, zoom out, look at the entire system of patches. In this view, a species can totally survive because even if it winks out in one patch, individuals from another patch can come over and recolonize it. It's a game changer. Survival isn't about the individual patch, it's about the strength of the whole network. So, you really have two totally different ways of seeing a fragmented world. Island biogeography puts the spotlight on isolation, where extinction is the big, scary force. But metapopulation theory comes in and shifts the focus completely. It's all about connection, about the network. And the primary force isn't extinction, it's persistence. And this idea of connection, it's not just a nice thought. It's a real tool that conservationists are using on the ground right now to save species. Let's see some lessons from the field. For this one, we're off to Ecuador, to the Podocarpus yaquambi corridor. It's a classic situation, stunning tropical forests getting chopped up by roads and farms. But the solution here was brilliant. They didn't just try to protect the pieces, they decided to build bridges between them. So, the big question, does it actually work? Oh, yeah, big time. This corridor is literally a lifeline. It's how animals like the Andean tapir can move between patches of forest. It's used by critical species like forest bats and seed dispersing birds, which helps keep the forest itself healthy. So you see, it's not just a path, it's a functioning artery, pumping life through the ecosystem.
What these examples really give us is a blueprint. They show us how we can take these big scientific ideas and turn them into smarter conservation strategies that actually work. It's all about one thing: reconnecting our planet. So, what does this blueprint look like? Well, first, you stop thinking about just one big park and start designing a whole network of connected safe havens. Then, you actively build and protect the corridors that link them. Of course, you have to constantly monitor everything to see what's working and what isn't, and that data lets you get really strategic, figuring out which patches are thriving sources and which are struggling sinks that need a helping hand.
Okay, so let's pull this all together. The root cause is us, human-led fragmentation. From there, the story can go two ways. If you follow the isolation rule based on island biogeography, small and separate patches lose species and fade away. But if you apply the connection rule from metapopulation theory, the whole system can survive and even thrive as long as those links stay strong.
Look, if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. Fragmentation is the disease, but connectivity is the cure. It's that simple. By building wildlife corridors and thinking in terms of networks instead of isolated parks, we give species a fighting chance. This isn't just theory for a textbook. It's a practical, real-world guide for how we can start to heal our planet. Which leaves us with a really tough but incredibly important question. We understand the ecological rules now, we know how this works. But actually applying these rules means making some hard choices. It means putting ecological connection first, sometimes over a new highway or a new development. So the question for all of us is, how do we strike that balance? That's the challenge ahead in our broken but, not quite hopeless world.